All right, welcome everybody to Flat Earth Civil Discourse, episode 6, with our guest, The Plain Truth. We have Travis with us tonight for an hour-long conversation, and come what may, but the rule is discourse will rule the day. So, Travis, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll jump right in.
Okay, sure. Hold on real quick. Excuse me. Yeah, my name's Travis Finley, and I got pushed into the flat Earth arena back in August, and basically came out of nowhere during the eclipse. Somebody posted some crazy flat Earth eclipse meme on YouTube, on Facebook, and I was just curious. I'm like, where is this coming from? And didn't really pursue it any further. I knew the guy who posted it, so I thought he was just goofing around. And then at some later point, maybe a couple weeks later, I was listening to a sermon, and I'd listened to a couple of other sermons by this guy, and so I liked his style and liked his content. And then all of a sudden, he starts talking about flat Earth, and I'm like, what the heck is going on? And he gives his basic apologetic for it, which was simply a defense against the Coriolis effect with air flight travel from east to west. And I haven't heard anybody else give this testimony, but I would have to say that I'm probably the only person that was convinced within 5 minutes of hearing an argument. And I just sat there thinking that totally makes sense. And I just jumped into the arena and started listening to stuff and watching stuff, and just never looked back. I do have a master's degree in divinity. It's called an MDiv, a Master's of Divinity. So basically that has to do with church management and then also pastoral training. So that's a little bit of my background, except for the fact that I'm a truck driver, and I have a lot of time to burn, and I'm glad that the internet exists. Otherwise, if I was driving for 12 hours and had nothing to do, I would go absolutely insane.
Well, that's a fantastic story. Now, tell me again about this sermon. Was it something you heard on the internet or a podcast, or were you actually in a church? Or
No, it was over the internet. So I'm sure maybe somebody in my circles posted a sermon by this pastor, and I had listened to some of his before, so I just clicked on it. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I had enjoyed the content and his delivery prior to that, and nothing was too crazy. And then all of a sudden, he just brings out this flat Earth comment out of nowhere. I
that's
was just like,
fantastic.
this was so weird.
But
So
and his focus was the Coriolis effect with
yeah,
airplanes. Yeah.
basically he just said, if the Earth is spinning, and if you think about if it's traveling west to east, then if you leave from New York and you head toward LA, then the destination should be moving towards you, and you should get there faster. And as basic as that sounds, I was just like, that totally makes sense. And
Interesting.
everything experiential for me came into play too, because I think this is the way it is when I think about this in terms of even, I can't think back precisely to what I was like as a first grader and what I would have thought when I was told that we lived on a ball that was spinning and water and whatnot. But you do hear anecdotes of 6 or 7 year olds, first graders saying, why does the water not fall off, and can they stand upside down? And something was like a vague memory of, yeah, maybe I remember hearing that when I was a kid, and I just never thought about it. But so, when you think about the logic of the question, from a 6 year old or a first grader, when they think about what they're being told and they say, well, doesn't that mean that they're upside down? I think that shows you the simplicity of the question and the profundity of the physics. And so I just started thinking about, okay, merry-go-rounds, centrifugal force, moving sidewalks, if I'm traveling with the sidewalk, and I'm walking at 3 miles an hour, and the sidewalk is traveling at 5 miles an hour, then I'm actually going 8 miles an hour. And if I turn around and walk 3 miles an hour against 5 miles an hour, and then if I'm in a river swimming with, and just all of the physics of what is simple and I think obvious. I was just like, yeah, that totally makes sense. So, like I said, I wasn't even a conspiracy theorist before that.
Right.
This was the very first thing that I got thrown into.
So it was more from the, like the experiential side, and then the physics concepts just made sense to you, based on how you thought as a little kid. Yeah,
or not even as a little kid, even as putting myself where I am now and just thinking of those concepts objectively, like taking a step back, because you know that hearing the sermon, I was a heliocentrist. I was totally into everything, not into it like I was a fanboy, but just I believed the system,
right?
So it wasn't as if I was trying to convince myself to go into it. I was just looking at it and taking a step back and going, okay, yeah, that just totally makes sense.
So it just resonated with you.
Yeah.
It's and I just thought of this. If I could tell a story from my childhood, when, of course, we were all taught the globe, and I just was imagining, okay, so we're on and I said the side. At least that's how I pictured it. The side of this globe. And of course, there's a globe sitting there in the classroom, and I wasn't really thinking about where exactly the United States was, but I just pictured myself like on the side. Like, okay, so I got gravity, and then so we're turning on the axis. And then that's how we see sunrise and sunset. It's like, because we're turning. And so I was expecting that the sun would come up 90 degrees from the horizon based on this model. And what bothered me when I was a kid, I remember from a fairly young age, like, whenever you're watching like a werewolf movie or, some kind of scary movie where they're trying to set the mood, and they'll have a time lapse of the full moon rising with a bunch of scary looking clouds. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about. It's something to kind of enhance the effect of the movie. They usually have like a time lapse of either the sun setting,
sure.
because then things are going to come out, or the moon rising, because with a full moon and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And the thing that always bugged me when I was a kid watching these is like, how come they never show the sun or the moon rising 90 degrees from the horizon? Like, isn't it supposed to rise 90 degrees from the horizon? And they always showed it rising at an angle. Or setting at an angle. And it wasn't until I it wasn't until I started participating in the flat earth debate that I got why that was, why it was that angle. And it turns out that angle is the complement of your latitude. So, studying the flat earth debate caused me to study the globe, and then that caused me to realize what that angle really was.
Right, so anyway, let me go back to, I'm trying to visualize in my mind what you're telling me. So basically, if you're saying you're just looking straight ahead and you see the landscape in front of you, you're saying that you can recall pretty much seeing the moon ascend at a 90-degree angle, or not?
Well, no, that's what I was expecting. When I learned as a child, when I learned the heliocentric model, that the moon orbits us and that we orbit the sun, and that it's our daily rotation that gives us, say, night and day. So I was expecting, like, given just the geometry of that, and that obviously we don't live on the North Pole, so I'm not standing on the top of the pole, but I didn't take the thinking to the next level. I just put myself on the side of the globe because, okay, I'm not at the top of the globe. I'm clearly not in the Arctic. So I just put myself arbitrarily on the side. I wasn't really thinking equator. I wasn't thinking anything specific. I just put myself on the side of the globe. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Shouldn't that mean, if I was on the side of the globe, shouldn't that mean that the sun and the moon should rise 90 degrees from the horizon? And that's sort of what I was expecting, just based on the geometry, because I wasn't thinking it. Of course, I was a little kid. I wasn't really thinking it through. And then I saw these movies, and these movies always showed it at an angle. And that always bugged me. Every time I saw those scenes, that always bugged me, because, like, shouldn't it be rising 90 degrees? Because we're on the side of a globe. And wasn't getting that, like, yeah, we're on the side of the globe, but we're on the sloping side of the globe. And then so I finally figured out what the math was.
Okay.
So. But yeah, so you've got a very interesting start to this, and tell us how you kind of got into Nathan's panel, because it's you're quite a frequent contributor over there, and I'm very impressed because like you're clearly in your truck. I hear you go, you know.
Yeah.
How'd that come about, and you know, like actually, what are the logistics of that?
Well, I don't remember actually. I don't remember when I stumbled across Nathan, but it would have to be in the past couple of months. So I didn't even come across, I mean, my first exposure with the flat earth stuff was your typical Mark Sargent, Eric Dubay, and even Dell with Beyond the Imaginary Curve.
Right.
So I don't know whether or not it was just the feed that came up and Nathan Oakley was there or what, but I started listening, and I think there were a couple of times where the trolls were really heavy. So he was saying, you know, there's a link in the description box if you want to come and just take a spot. So that's what I did. I just went in to simply be a placeholder.
Okay.
And then I think sitting there for as long as I did, I started to just perhaps get a little bit of, you know, of a confident nature to contribute. So every once in a while, if I think that I've got something worthwhile to say, I'll try to cut in. But if it's hot and heavy, man, it's tough to get one word in.
Yeah, and sometimes it's a little triggery, you know, and it gets a little heated, and so. But it's, you know, it's interesting. The thing is, it's entertainment, you know. And one of the things that actually Nathan himself said today is that he's not exactly a master of drama, but that he, you know, he's pretty well versed in it. So I thought that was kind of funny. He'd say that.
Yeah.
All right. So I do have a question from the chat, and I wasn't gonna, you know, I'm not gonna try to come at you, and the feel free to just not.
Let it rip, man.
No, but it just says you know, it's from Jamie Thompson, and he was interested in asking you why you don't speak up when Nathan violates his own rules and plays favorites. So.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I've said things on the show, and I think that I've also said it off the show and in the Skype chat. So he's got a Skype chat group where everybody who is given the invitation, I've made my point clear in those forums.
Okay.
That I actually think that there were a couple of shows where it might have gotten pretty blatant, and I voiced down in the comments, I wish that Nathan would ease up in situations like this and not get as, I guess I would say, colorful with his language and attacking the person. So while I haven't done it necessarily, like where if the show was going on and I would say, hey Nathan, just settle down there, buddy. I don't know that I have a voice in his life to say that. I think that you know, Anthony has done that. Arwen's done that. You know, where they've said, hey Nathan, ease up. You know, he's just trying to say this or he's just trying to say that. So, but I will say that in the chat and in the comments, I have made it clear. As a matter of fact, one of the new contributors' belief is a thief. Was brought up on some pretty heavy charges in the past couple of days, and I went to his defense on his videos,
right,
and made some comments. So
yeah, well, I will say this. I appreciate Jamie's question, but you know, the thing is, it is Nathan's channel, it is his show, and so like there's a certain amount of I don't know, deference. You know, you want to be deferential to the host of his own show. So I get that. Yeah. But I will say this, Travis, I have seen you extremely diplomatically say things that are trying to get the conversation back into more of either a debate or a discussion when somebody is like kind of going off, and you do that pretty skillfully. And so I commend you for that, because when things are going off the rails, it's not easy to get them back on. But oftentimes you're like, hey, can we get input from somebody else on the panel? Or I forget how you phrase it, but you know.
I think maybe that would be like, stepping in and Well, not only that, but I also think that hearing an argument from another person, because Nathan does have a special focus when he is trying to make a point about the scientific method or whatnot. He is very, very repetitive. And one of the things that I think happens as well is if you get into a back and forth with someone, most often it's an issue of communication, and someone is mishearing or misunderstanding what the other person is saying. So
Right.
I think the other day I stepped in and said, okay, we've heard from Nathan. I didn't say it this way, but I said, okay, we've heard from Nathan. We've heard what he wanted to say. I think that if someone else chimed in and took, I don't know, whoever it was, XYZ, and his argument, maybe something else can be said that would be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting show because I've noticed that when people like it's natural when people are being screamed at and called names that they get their back up and then they start kind of trying to respond in kind. But I've noticed that sometimes when people kind of can sort of laugh it off or just sort of shrug it off, and then like sometimes things kind of calm down. Like if it doesn't turn into a heated back and forth. Like if the heat is only coming in one direction and the other person is just sort of non-committal, then sometimes it can kind of come down. And then I think sometimes the person who's generating the heat sometimes realizes that. But yeah, so it's an interesting show, and I appreciate your contribution to it.
Well, good. I appreciate your appreciation.
So, do you have any topics? Because the thing is, we got 45 minutes, and I don't want to just talk about somebody else's show. Let's talk about you and what your thoughts are, and if you want to come at me with something that really bugs you about the globe, or if you think something that really solidifies flat Earth for you, or if you want to just kind of engage in some topics. This isn't a debate, so
Sure.
doesn't have to be like the top 10 or anything. So
yeah. I think that I'll just start talking and see if something comes to mind in particular. One thing that does come to my mind as a Christian, I am already a heretic in Christian circles because of particular views that I hold to the biblical story that is different than the mainstream. So by analogy, I would fit in very well with a flat earth community because it goes against the mainstream. And not just to be contrarian, my position in certain biblical perspectives is hopefully, I would like to say as much as anybody, objective and based on the text itself. So for instance, I don't think that Genesis chapter 1 is a literal creation story. I think that it's a symbolic allegory,
like a metaphor.
It's metaphoric, but it's not simply metaphoric for metaphor's sake. I believe that it is something that is deeply rooted throughout the whole of the scriptures. So I have my own podcast that's called Rethinking Revelation. And in that podcast, I've gone through my methodology of I don't want to say my methodology per se, but it is a response and a process of reading everybody else and saying, okay, what this guy says makes sense, what this guy says makes sense, but something else that either one of them says doesn't make sense. And so then there's a bit you take in, you see which of their arguments makes the most sense, and if there's inconsistency. So, for instance, one of my heroes in biblical interpretation will take a literal reading of Genesis. It is actually 100% literal, 7 days creation, all the whole 9 yards. But he will then also take an allegorical approach, and he wants the best of both worlds. I find that a bit constrained. Okay, so I would side with him on the allegory, but then differ with him on the literal, because I think
it does seem contradictory to want to go for a literal 7 days, but then an allegorical other stuff.
Right, but see, in that situation though, that I find a lot of crossovers in the flat Earth discussion, because you have two different models, and you have people who are deeply entrenched and convinced and persuaded of the objectivity of their model. So I find maybe your kudos to my being diplomatic, so to speak, has already come from my experience in the past 20 years of being contrarian and having discussions with people and realizing, okay, what I'm saying is coming across poorly. What I'm saying might not be clear. How can I make this more clear? And I really try to listen to what the other person is saying so that I can say, okay, here's where the hiccup is. So that experience for me with my roots in biblical interpretation, I think for me, has hopefully helped me be a little bit more diplomatic and amenable in conversations about flat Earth. Because I know, as much as I'm convinced that Genesis 1 is this way, the other person is not, and I can't degrade him or try to put him down, because that's not the way the argument's won. And
right. The thing is, so often civility is just lost, and it's like, if you really want to engage somebody on the ideas, you shouldn't have to resort to the nonsense. You can kind of, and then if you misunderstand somebody, or if you feel that you're being misunderstood, it's so often these things just kind of run away when it doesn't have to go that way. People get very personal very quickly.
Yeah. But all that to say too, then it's just a matter of when those two worldviews come into conflict, and you think, it is so obvious to me, this is so clear, this makes so much sense, but you're a heliocentrist, and I'll be like, yeah, but you're wrong.
Right.
Yeah. So as long as the both of you in a discussion can have that attitude, like, I'm totally convinced of this, and I'm going to try to come at you with an argument that will one day be the seed that hopefully will germinate, and you will think, there it is, that's it, that's the nail in the coffin, that's what I was looking for, and now that's convinced me, or that's not, so it's an interesting dance.
The theological side of it is also fascinating, because I heard, I think it was on the show today, this morning, where somebody was given a choice. They either could believe in the Big Bang, or they could believe in God. And and it was just like, it was a false dichotomy. And the thing is that what a lot of folks today don't realize, because right now sort of it's been portrayed, I guess, in the media, or at least the pop culture, that there's a battle between science and religion, and it's like you're either on the side of science or you're on the side of religion. And there's a couple main players where it's like, okay, so there's this church, and they say, we believe in creationism, therefore we don't believe in evolution. So it's like, we're going to throw evolution out, we're going to go with creationism. And so it's like, all right, science versus God. But in actuality, the vast majority of the world's scientists have, for most of recorded history, believed in a higher power, whether it's God, or whether they're actually being Christian or Jewish or what have you. That most scientists have been people of faith, people of great faith, and that whole quote from the tombstone of Werner von Braun. It's like he was, he believed in God, and he thought that God shows his handiwork in the heavens. So I think it's, so the point I was going to make about the Big Bang is like, so we have creation, or at least the Genesis, like the earth, the creation of the earth, the universe, whatever. And it's like, who's to say that God didn't create the Big Bang? Like, who's to say that wasn't God's mode of creation?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, and then my wife has a great quote, because like, you look at astronomy and you see all these wonderful images of these galaxies and nebula, and just some stunning images, and my wife says, why do they deny God his majesty? Meaning these folks who just think that we're in a dome or something, and that these are just lights in the sky. So it's just interesting stuff to think about, because you can be a devout Christian, or devout believer in God, and also believe in modern day science.
No, most definitely. I think Anthony was making that point, and I disagreed with him. He was basically saying you can't be a heliocentrist and a Christian, and that, I mean, obviously that can't be farthest from the truth, because back in July of 2017, that's exactly what I was. And
Right.
one of my most ardent opponents on my Facebook groups, or my Facebook friends, is a friend from high school, and he is a huge fanboy of everything science, everything heliocentric, and a Christian. So yeah, I'm not really sure exactly where Anthony, unless he was just, in his mind, it's just an oxymoron. He just can't see how the two can be compatible. And then again, I've got a friend who's a strong Christian, but he is theistic evolution, and
Okay.
I'm not.
So when you say theistic evolution,
that is
like,
that God is, that's the way he set everything in motion. So
okay.
he used the mechanism of evolution to bring humanity to its place.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's because the thing is, people like to attribute to God certain actions, but they say, they act like he's not capable of other actions. It's like, if we're talking about God, I think he can do whatever he wants.
Right.
So it's like, who's to say that God can't create evolution? Who's to say that God can't create the Big Bang?
Yeah.
It's like, why
Right.
deny God those powers? It seems very silly that you're just going to put him in a box that it's like, well, this is the way God's portrayed in the movies, so that's the way we're gonna kind of confine him into that little cubby hole.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a fascinating study. I don't know if you're aware. Actually, maybe many of my listeners probably are not aware of this, but I am a newly baptized Christian, and I just got baptized, I guess, this past December, and it was a very moving experience for me. Actually, the big moving experience was prior to baptism, when I sort of was converted, because I've been a skeptic, most of my adult life, and I was raised in a Christian church, and kind of fell away from it when I studied mythology, and it's like I couldn't see the difference between mythology, how we're kind of goofing on the Greeks and the Romans with their pantheon of gods, and then meanwhile we've got our God. I mean, it's just one of them, but we've got one God. It's like, well, and the stories are, kind of folk tales, and so I just kind of disbelieved in the whole thing after studying mythology. And then I called myself an atheist, and then I called myself an agnostic, and then I went back to atheist, and then I studied Buddhism. I went and I spent time at a Buddhist monastery up in the hills of Vermont, and did a ton of studying, ton of reading, and then I kind of finally settled back on a kind-hearted atheist because I couldn't see the personal God, but I do believe in a higher power, which it seems kind of strange for an atheist to say that. So I was just kind of a mess, but I kind of have seen the light, and it was a very, very personal experience, and so I consider myself a Christian now. And
what tradition?
I'm a Mormon.
Okay.
So and it was
that your original tradition as well?
Oh no, I was raised in the United Church of Christ, which is a
I know it. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, the UCC. Okay.
Yeah. I actually candidated at a church to be a pastor at a UCC church.
Really? Yeah. Fantastic. Small world. But there's a fascinating book called Mormon Scientists, and it's about Henry Eyring, who is the father of one of the 12. There's 12 in the leadership of the Mormon Church. You've got the prophet who's leading the church, and then he has 12 counselors. They don't call them disciples, but I'm still new in the church, so I can't think of the terminology.
Apostles.
12 apostles. I don't. I'm just going to call them the 12. But one of the 12 is a man by the name of Henry Eyring, and his father was a scientist, a chemist. He was in the early stages of combining quantum physics with chemistry, and he made some groundbreaking discoveries, and actually groundbreaking predictions, where he applied quantum physics principles to chemistry, and then ended up predicting rates of reactions in in different situations where they really didn't have any answer for how come these reactions proceed at this rate. It doesn't really make sense. And this guy comes in with combining quantum physics, and then all of a sudden everything starts falling into place, and it all started making sense. And he was very, very well published. I think he published like 600 papers. So the senior Eyring has a great story from when he was going off to college. And so he was raised by a simple man. I guess he was raised on a farm or a ranch, and but raised in the Mormon faith. And you know how sometimes there's this the story of like the father taking the son on, come here, son, let me speak to you before you go off to the big city, or in this case, going off to college. And because we all know that a lot of stuff can happen in college, and oftentimes kids are, when I say kids, 18-year-olds are subjected or influenced by a lot of professors, and they come home from their first semester of college, and all of a sudden they're an expert at everything. I mean, that's we all know that story. So Henry Eyring's father, and we're talking about the grandfather of the Henry Eyring, who's a member of the 12, said, come here, son, and then he gave him the father-son talk before he went off to college. And he said, if you surround yourself with good people, you're going to learn a lot of interesting things in college. But if you surround yourself with good people, and you remember that the Mormon church won't ask you to believe anything that's not true, you should be fine. And so, he knew his son was going to be going off and studying either chemistry or physics or both. And I thought that really resonated with me, that the phrase, the Mormon church won't ask you to believe anything that isn't true. And what that means, it's very interesting, the Mormon stance on this, because it's like there's no, Mormons marching against evolution, because it's like, okay, if the scientific, record says evolution is true, well then, hey, let's go with it, So there's no conflict between science and the Mormon faith, like, the cutting edge physics stuff, quantum mechanics. I mean, like, no matter where they go, it's not going to contradict anything in the Mormon faith, because the Mormon faith won't ask you to believe anything that's not true. So it's just really, it's kind of refreshing, because there's so many times there's this line in the sand, like, we can't believe in evolution, because that goes against God. And it's like, well, what if God created evolution? So anyway.
Yeah. There's an interesting dynamic in the flat earth discussion that is, I think, an unfortunate reality. And that is that we have a lot of Christians who are purporting that the Bible is a flat earth book. And I don't hold to that position. So it's interesting, the correlation that you brought up between science and the Bible. There are two main avenues of revelation that the Christian tradition holds to. That is that the Bible is God's special revelation in written form, and that nature is God's general revelation, so that both are books that can be read and interpreted, that give us insight into the character and nature and person of God.
Interesting.
So, with Genesis chapter 1, you have the classic position where if you interpret it literally, then you have 7 days of creation, and then you have the truncated view of history that it's not millions and millions of years. So that you have then, well, if science says that it is millions of years, but the Bible says that it's 7 days, and that would then mean this, that, and the other thing, then you end up choosing one book over the other. I don't think that the books are in conflict. I don't think they contradict each other. I think that we have to take them on their own merit in terms of what they are trying to communicate. So the Bible is not a science book. So the Genesis is, I don't think, useful in discussing evolution,
right?
Because that's not what it was written for.
Right. Genesis is not a biology textbook,
right? But on the same vein, though, I would say that the Bible is not a scientific textbook either. So that when we look at the four corners, and the earth will not be moved, and the earth is not shaken, and the earth will stand firm forever, I don't believe those are texts that
are describing literal reality, right? They're not describing literal, right?
Yeah. And the main reason is because the Hebrew word for earth is not, well, earth is an English word for us, okay? So in Hebrew, the word is eretz. there's only one word, eretz, and it's translated as land and earth, so that the translators are making a distinction between something that is locally geographic and something that is distantly geographic and more massive.
Right.
So when they translated earth, they think that it has global, to use that phrase, proportions, but when it's talking about land, it's talking about something that's more central and localized. The same thing in the New Testament. When you get into the New Testament, the Greek word for land is ge, gay, which is where we get geography and all that. So, but it's the same thing. It just means land.
Right.
So I would prefer, and like I said, I've done this in my podcast, I would prefer that in every single instance, it's simply land. It should never be translated earth, because what that does is that poisons the well, so to speak.
Right.
It influences us to think this is what this text is saying, rather than not.
Right. Well, you know what really strikes me is that, it's like in everyday language, we know that words have multiple meanings. Like if I said the word man, I could be talking about a single adult person of the XY chromosome persuasion. Okay. Or what if I say the word man, I could be talking about all of humanity, and it's like the word man actually has multiple meanings. And like, even today, the word earth has multiple meanings, earthworm, it's not like a planet worm, an earthworm, it digs in the earth, like soil and earth are synonymous. That's why whenever I talk about the flat earth debate, I always capitalize the E of earth, just because I'm referring to the planet, so I give earth a proper noun, I capitalize the E, at least I try to. And it's like, so when the people talk about like, oh, in scripture, you're reading the scripture and this word means, and then they give it exactly one definition, and it's like, wait a minute. Are you telling me that is the only possible meaning, is the meaning that you're ascribing to it,
Yeah.
And it just seems very convenient,
It can be at times, but again, my perspective on the biblical story is that I'll just stick with the land, for instance, that the land in 90% of the time when it's used in the Bible from Genesis to Revelation is talking about the land of Israel. So it's talking about a localized geography. There are times when it can be the land of Assyria, but then that demarcation is made. It's the land of Assyria, or it's the land of Babylon, or it's the land of Egypt. But for the most part, when it's talking about the land will not be moved and the land is established, it's talking about Israel, and it's doing it for a theological purpose. So instead of saying the earth will not be moved, it's not talking about the earth. It's just not, because the Bible was not considered with North America or Australia or New Guinea or anything else. It was always about that centralized plot of land in the ancient Near East. But we digress.
So it is very interesting how and even in the modern debate or about flat Earth, about like the scientific method and what is the definition of science, and what is the definition of the scientific method, and what makes an experiment. And it's like, people, when I say people, I mean somebody with the initials QE. I'm not going to say his name. Very, very arbitrary with the definitions.
Well, he and I would have a very, very hot and bothered discussion, because he is a literalist when it comes to interpreting the Bible.
Right. I think he do you use the term young Earth creationist for some of these folks? Where the Earth is approximately like 4,000 years old, or something.
It would be. I don't know that anybody would hold it being that low. It's usually 6 to 10.
Oh, okay, but still measured in thousands, right?
Yeah.
Because I guess they count all the begats going all the way back, and they kind of give people an approximate age. And it's so funny, because so many times people don't understand that they are using a very specific definition that they themselves have chosen, and then they're sort of broadcasting it like that is the holy truth. When I don't mean to say holy, that is the truth. And so with some of the scientific debates with that fellow, like he talks about air pressure, or he talks about pressure, And then he literally uses the first 2 paragraphs out of a 3-paragraph definition of pressure. The first 2 paragraphs talk about a container. The 3rd paragraph talks about atmospheric air pressure. And he just cites the first 2 as an authority. Look, it's defined by a container, and then just completely, But anyway, let's not talk about other folks.
Well, I mean, we could simply analyze. I mean, we would have to speculate in terms of saying, okay, now why is he not paying attention to the 3rd paragraph?
Oh, I've called him on it.
No, I understand that. But let's just have a little fun. So, what do you imagine if you could come to his defense, even though you might disagree with him? Why would he avoid that 3rd paragraph? Why do you think?
Well, because I think his worldview comes first. I believe that a lot of folks are in the flat Earth debate, and you don't strike me as in this vein. I think you kind of sort of fell into the flat Earth debate, but some people, they were almost believers, like they just needed to be introduced. And I think his belief comes first, and then everything else is just going to be explained away.
But see, at the same time, I don't think that you and I would differ from that, because we are ruled by our paradigm. I mean, there is something in your makeup, in what you believe. If we talked about a certain facet of science or mathematics, there is something that you believe that precludes any alternative. You're just not going to consider it because of a prior commitment that you have to a certain paradigm. So that is inescapable. And I don't fault anyone for that. Otherwise, we wouldn't necessarily be able to remain consistent. So when a lot of the accusations that come to Nathan Oakley and everyone on the panel that is flat Earth is that, well, you guys have presuppositions too. You guys have Well, yeah, that's how everybody operates. I presuppose that when I'm speaking to you, Charles, you know English.
Right.
So I mean, so that's a lesser degree of presupposition, but nonetheless, and when we say presupposition, it's not something that's assumed without a basis. A presupposition is something that is foundational, and then that foundation leads to a natural consequence or a natural deduction.
Right.
It could be illogical, it could be invalid, but for the most part, I'm making the decision, or I'm saying what I'm saying because I have to. I have to say this because of a prior commitment I hold to this, but it's not willy-nilly.
Right. And you are true. You are correct about the presuppositions. Like, for example, when I look up and I say, you study the Earth or study the sun, moon, and stars, my presupposition is that when we see something, it's pretty much there. Like, we're looking at the sun. I'm presupposing that we're actually looking at the sun, that the sun isn't actually 90 degrees to our left.
So let me ask you this, because I can remember learning that when the sun rises, we're actually seeing the sun arrive at our eyes at a later point. The sun is actually higher in the sky, and we don't see that yet.
No, it's actually lower. We see, like, if we're talking about sunrise, we are going to see the sun before the geologic feature of the land permits us to see the sun if we didn't have an atmosphere. I guess I'm kind of muddling the words. So in other words, if you take 2 observers and like you start the stopwatch and you're like, okay, the first observer is seeing sunrise, boom, and then you evacuate the atmosphere from the second observer, so he's standing on a planet the size of Earth, but with no atmosphere. He's going to see the sunrise about 4 to 8 minutes later, because the actual physical sun is lagging far behind. The best way of explaining this, or at least visualizing it, is with sunset. Sunrise, it's kind of weird because you're sort of playing it in reverse, but sunset is really neat because you can actually do this with a video if you have, like, any capability of either drawing pictures on a video screen, like opening up either a video editor, or even sometimes PowerPoint. You can actually, like, play a video in a PowerPoint screen, but then use the circle drawing tool to, like, draw, just a circle object over the video player. But the point I'm trying to make is that you could actually take a time lapse of the sun setting, draw circles of the sun, like 1 sun diameter apart. And then what you'll find is, like, the sun may get kind of squashy on the bottom, but then continue to draw those circles. And what you'll find is like the sun is actually moving at a consistent rate, a consistent angular rate. But it gets kind of squashy at the bottom with certain conditions. I mean, sometimes it goes kind of straight down, but so that's where, refraction is sort of squashing at the bottom, which means the actual sun is further along. Like the sun isn't actually getting squashed at the bottom. The circle of the sun has already moved that point past that point. Does that make sense? And so if you keep drawing these circles and you kind of do a timestamp thing, like every, I don't know, and I should know this off the top of my head, but like, let's say it's every 4 minutes. Every 4 minutes, the sun's moved one sun diameter. Please don't quote me on that. I just made that up. But basically, if you do the timestamp on the video and you advance it 4 minutes and then draw another sun circle, what you'll find is the sun appears to be moving slightly slower and squashes at the bottom, so that at the moment of sunset, the actual sun is a full sun diameter below the horizon. I don't know. I think I made a hash of that, but that's
no. Well, you lost me at the beginning, but when you came back around at the end, I understood what you were saying.
At some point, I'm actually going to try to do this with, but I'm not a video editor. I narrate keynote slideshows. So that's how I kind of fake my way through videos. But all right, so we've got 15 minutes left. Let's try some hard flat Earth, globe Earth stuff.
Okay.
What is there anything that, I mean, I know you say that the flat Earth kind of, either resonates with you and you're coming at it from a theological perspective, but I mean, it just sort of agrees with your senses. But is there something that says, come on, it can't be a globe because, and then blank, just like something that either just comes to mind, or it could be like the toughest piece of evidence you have, or so anything at all. It doesn't have to be the toughest piece of.
I'd like to think that, and I would have to say, if only I knew then what I know now. If I could put what I understand into the mind of a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old, I would hope that I would be the kid that says that the emperor has no clothes.
Okay.
And I would hope that I would stand in the classroom and say, okay, what you're describing is physically impossible for a spinning ball to not lose the water, so that the water wouldn't spin off the surface. That's one thing.
Okay.
The other thing would be, again, if the ball is the correct model, then there are people that are standing on the side. There are ships that are actually traveling up the mountain of water,
right, for the Nile,
down the mountain. Or even on the ocean. Ocean. You're traveling. I mean, and you can tell me all you want how, oh no, gravity does this, or gravity. Yeah, you can tell me that all you want, but I'm just telling you, I'm just calling BS.
Sure.
I don't believe it. I just don't believe it.
So, all right, can I stop there, because we have 12 more minutes. Can I tackle the spinning ball and the water spinning off it? Can I tackle that one?
I don't know why you would. I've heard the argument. I grew up with it for the past 45 years of my life. Okay,
well, but the thing is, the flat Earth videos and flat Earth propagators, content producers, they will never call the Earth a planet. They always call it, when they're arguing against the globe, they never argue against a planet. They always argue against a spinning ball. And there's a very, very good reason for that, because a spinning ball is a cartoon. Okay. The Earth is not a spinning ball. And so the fact that, like, you could say probably 90% of flat Earth videos say the phrase spinning ball at least once. And the Earth is not a spinning ball. So it's like, if you say the Earth is not a spinning ball, I agree with you.
Let me call BS on your spin. So you're just spinning stuff right now.
I'm just spinning stuff.
Flat Earth math, Charles.
Sure, tell me.
So I would say the reason why I would refer to it as a spinning ball is because that's the concept that you need to see in your mind, instead of a planet, which is almost depersonalizing it. It's not the real word that I'm looking for. It makes it more palatable. If you call it a planet, it makes it more palatable for you to explain gravity and the scientific magic. But if I call it a spinning ball and I harp on that, I'm trying to put into your mind a concept that you should know can't be real. Well, water does not adhere to the surface.
Right, but it's not real. Like the Earth is not a spinning ball. That's the whole point. If you argue that the Earth is not a spinning ball, guess what? Heliocentrists agree with you. The Earth is not a spinning ball. It's just.
So why are you quibbling about that terminology then?
Well, because the whole thing about emphasizing spin and emphasizing the word ball, the word ball denotes something that's small, and the word spin denotes something that's moving rotationally fast.
No.
Yes.
That the denotation of a ball is something small.
Well, then the thing is, you get these folks who are talking about literally, why aren't skyscrapers leaning away from you? Like when we look at Chicago across Lake Michigan, how come they're not leaning away from you?
That's my first video that I made, and I called it angular curvature. Yep.
Okay. What's the angular curvature in 40 miles across Lake Michigan? It's 0.6 degrees.
Yeah. Right.
I mean,
no. Okay, so here's an interesting question that if we don't cover it right now, we can pick it up later. Okay.
Sure.
What does that mean? What is the measurement in something that I can understand? So for instance, if you were to tell me that it's 25 degrees in Amsterdam, it's actually closer to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, but you're using Celsius.
Right.
Okay. So when you talk about a degree, that means nothing to me because I don't know what that looks like.
Okay.
So part of my retaliation against the approach that you're bringing right now is what I call the great scale negation. That is that the argument is that the scale is such that it completely undoes what we know should be happening. So I would venture to guess, Charles, that that if something is on the side of something and it is turning away from you, that it will be angling away from you. Now, I don't care what you want to call the scale per se, but the physics of that reality.
Yes.
So you're saying, yeah, that right. I can see what you're saying. That makes sense. That
technically the Twin Towers, may they rest in peace. But technically the Twin Towers were leaning away from each other.
Because, same with the Verrazano Bridge, and I just don't buy it. I just don't buy it.
Yeah, well, that's a silly story, and we'll have to cover that another time. But the thing is, when flat Earth folks say, "How come these things aren't leaning away?" It sounds like their expectation is that they should be visibly leaning away, which means that they think the planet Earth is a ball, right? If it's a ball like a Super Mario or there's this
okay, so go back. Let's go back to that real quick. And so, if you don't want to call it a ball, what are you going to call it?
Planet.
Yeah, but what's the shape?
Globe.
Okay, so you're just splitting hairs in my opinion.
Well, no. Okay, I mean, I'm not going to try to solve the flat Earth debate by arguing over the word ball. But the point is that you were mentioning why doesn't the water spin off into space? It's because the planet's not spinning. Like that's one reason. If you actually consider the true speed of the Earth's turn, it's boring how slow the Earth is turning.
All right, fine. The water is not falling off.
Is this a gravity question or is this a centrifugal force question?
Well, if you're not allowing for speed.
Well, no, it's not that I'm not allowing. I'm saying use the actual speed. Use the actual speed given by the heliocentric model.
1,000 miles an hour.
Okay. Well, when have you known a rotating object to be given in a linear speed measurement? No, nowhere. And again, it's another form of subtle dishonesty by flat Earth content producers. Because it's, like if I were to say, hey, I'm going to spin something. I'm going to, throw a baseball. I'm going to give it a curveball. I'm going to give that thing some spin. Would it be fair to say that I'm going to spin this baseball at two different speeds at the same time? It's like, what? That doesn't make any sense. How can you spin a ball at two different speeds? Oh, well, if you measure it at the equator and you measure it at the 40-degree latitude, like nobody talks like that. Like literally nobody talks about the surface speed at a certain point on a ball.
Okay.
But if you do want to talk about 1,000 miles per hour at the equator, which is true, it's like 1,024 miles an hour. Why leave out the radius? Like, why did they leave out the radius? Why don't they say, oh, the equator's spinning 1,000 miles an hour, 4,000 miles from the point of rotation? You know, it's like, well, that deflates their argument. You know, so I was thinking about a steering wheel. Like, the
So
steering wheel
okay,
is
so hold
approximately
on.
60 inches. Go
So
ahead.
let's so what we're doing right now is we're looking down at a record turning at 45 RPMs.
Yes.
And you're
Oh,
talking about
you're old school, a single,
yeah,
huh?
yeah. And so you are talking about the edge as opposed to the center and the rate of speed. Is that right? That's just
Sure.
where you went. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. So because of time, we're running out.
Well,
It's not
yeah.
going to go anywhere. But let me say this: that I think that if you were to talk to most people, including my soon-to-be seventh grade son, who went toe to toe with me on heliocentrism, and who knows his indoctrination backwards and forwards, he would have in his mind a spinning ball.
Oh, sure, sure, because everything's not to scale. Right. I mean, like all the diagrams in a textbook are not to scale. That's a given. So the speed's not to scale. You know, the distance from the sun and the earth, and the distance between the earth and the moon, nothing's to scale. So including the speed. Like, you wouldn't have a video like, oh, here's a video of how the earth is moving in space, and have the video not look like it's moving at all, even though like that actually matches reality. Like, that wouldn't be an educational moment for a student. So it's like, okay, let's animate the earth. Okay, it's spinning on its axis. I totally get you. But when people are arguing against the heliocentrism, they're arguing against that sped up diagram. They're arguing against a spinning ball. The earth is not a spinning ball. And that's why you have people like a very prominent member of the Globebusters team. I mean, he wasn't always a member of the Globebusters team. I'm not going to name him. He's talking about how the centrifugal force is so strong at the equator that, or I'm saying gravity is so strong that for that to keep, the oceans stuck to the globe, well, then you go up to the North Pole where there's no centrifugal force. Well, then you should be crushed like a bug. And he uses that line, every other week, or at least he did last year. I stopped listening to Globebusters. But, so it's like, so there are people, very, very prominent people, who think the earth is a spinning ball.
Okay, yeah, but see, that's the problem. See, what's interesting right now is I'm having cognitive dissonance with your spin, because the model that my children have received, even in a Christian school, which is heliocentric, they would talk this way. So if it's not the case that it's a spinning ball, then the education they're getting is insufficient, because it represents it as if it is a spinning ball. Because that's what the globe is, on the desk, on the teacher's desk.
Sure.
You have the axis of rotation, and it spins.
All right, so let me clarify. If you are in a room of heliocentrists, all right, it's fine to use the phrase spinning ball. If you are in a debate between a flat earther and a heliocentrist, it's not a spinning ball. Like, the spinning ball, it's like everybody understands that the globe is sitting on the teacher's desk, and, oh, let's give it a spin. Like, we get that, but we also know that a day is 24 hours long. So it's like, we don't think that the earth is actually spinning, shedding water because it's spinning so fast, because we all know that a day is 24 hours long. But like, so that's not the issue among a room full of heliocentrists.
Yeah.
It's only an issue when you have a flat earther debating against a globe earther, and the flat earther refuses to say anything but spinning ball. That's the cartoon.
So what I hear you saying right now is, in terms of the rotation being 24 hours, is that it's making one rotation in 24 hours.
Yeah, it technically 23 hours and 56 minutes. Okay, but about a day. Okay, one rotation in about a day. Yes.
Yeah. Again, to me, that is the quintessential expression of the great scale of negation. That is, that everything that you think should happen in real life, because of what you know on a smaller scale, becomes completely negated and undone because of the massive scale of the actual reality. And in my opinion, as I look at it now, I don't buy it.
All right. Fair enough. Hey, you know what? We're gonna cut off, and the thing is, I think we had a very, very good discussion, and I predict that you and I will have a discussion like this in the future.
Excellent.
Where we're gonna sink our teeth into more topics. But I do want to keep these things to an hour. So
Sure.
if you would like to say some final comments before we close out, the floor is yours.
No, I'm good. I'm good. You can wrap it up. Thanks for having me on, Charles.
All right. And thank you very much, Travis, for being on. And thank you so much for all the folks who are in chat. We have 54 viewers right now. And I've been just kind of eyeballing the chat once in a while. I'm sorry I haven't been paying attention to it, but you guys have been very civil. Lots of good conversation. So thank you again to all of those who have been participating and people who will be leaving comments when this video is published. Thank you again to Travis, also known as The Plain Truth. This is Charles, aka Flat Earth Math. I hope you have a good evening.